Hi, in this demo we're going to talk about how we're going to add parts to an assembly in our user interface. Before we were adding them directly in main view controller on view.did.load. Now we're going to create a user interface to do that. So what have I done? I have added a segue from this assembly lists cells to a new view controller, which is a view controller that I'm going to use to add parts. Then that button, or that controller, has two buttons, one of which is the Arrange button, and I've added a segue from that Arrange button to this view controller, in which in the next demo we're going to be able to have the actual person on the assembly line arrange the parts that are in the assembly into a finished manufactured assembly. So this is all kind of abstract as far as a parts room application, but remember, in this parts room application we are showing techniques that you can use in kind of any app that you might have interest in developing. So let's look at this view controller. The Add Part view controller has a text field which will be the part number that we're going to add, a quantity, and this is a UI stepper control, and a label which shows the current value of that stepper control, and then two buttons, Add and Arrange. So now if I look at my assembly list view controller, we note that I have imported Add Part to Assembly view controller, and I have a new define Add Part controller, which is the segue.destination view controller downcast to that Add Part to Assembly view controller, so that when I prepare the segue, I can get this view controller as a compile time constant. So we've done this before in, say, the parts list view controller as well. So now let's look at some methods that I've added to my parts model. If I look at the header file, I'll see that I have a new one, Add Part to Assembly with quantity. I have a all parts for assembly, which is going to return an NS counted set. Each element of the set is going to be a part number, and then it's counted because there can be more than one part, or more than one of a specific part number in an assembly. And then I have delete all assembly parts, which I'm going to use from main view controller as kind of a band-aid to clear out the database before we begin doing anything. So now in my parts model, if I look at these new ones, I have Add Part to Assembly with quantity. So I open a database. Now I need two integers because I've got to do a couple of things. I've got to find the part numbers ID from the catalog table, and also the assembly numbers ID from the assembly table, so that I can add these into the join table with the quantity. So I'm doing a lot of selects here. The first one is going to be selecting the ID from the catalog where the part number is equal to whatever I pass in. The second one is likewise selecting the ID from the assembly table where the part number is what I pass in. And then I prepare two SQLite statements. So first I get the part ID, and we've looked at this several times, but it's just preparing the SQL, setting the result set, and then checking the result set, and then stepping through the SQL and finalizing. And then the assembly ID is gotten the same way. So I set these values here while we're stepping that. I should only have one ID because IDs, remember, are globally unique for part numbers and assembly numbers. So now we have the part ID and the assembly ID. We need to add both of these IDs to the join table with the quantity. And that insert query is going to be insert into assembly parts, part ID, assembly ID, and part quantity, and the values are all integers. I prepare the statement, I check the result, and then step the insert query, and then finalize the result. Finally, I close the database. Now here is the method that returns the NS counted set called all parts for assembly given an assembly number. So I prepare an NS counted set. I'm calling it retval for return value here. I open the database, I get a part ID and an assembly ID that I'm going to find, and then my part number string is going to be here. The first thing I must do is get the assembly ID given an assembly number. So I prepare the statement and query, and I have my assembly ID here. The next thing I need to do is get all the parts info inside that join table for this particular assembly ID. So the part join SQL is going to be selecting the part ID and the part quantity from the assembly parts join table, where the assembly ID is the given ID. I prepare my statement, and then I start stepping through it. Now, each time I'm going to have a different part ID. I need to get the name for each part ID as I step through this outer SQL query. My inner query then, get part number, is select part number from catalog where the ID is the part ID. So I prepare that and I send it out to the database, and I check to see if that is okay. I get the part name into the part num into the part num field, inner local variable part num, and then here I'm logging it out. And then otherwise, if this inner SQL fails for any reason, I say the inner select is not firing, and then I give it a string, which is SQLite 3 error message from the parts database. It's the last error out of the parts database. Then I reset this query because I'm going to change it every time through the while loop. Then I have a part quantity and the part number. So for all of the times that part number, the part quantity is there, I add the part number to my counted set. It'll add the part number once, but it'll have a count associated with it. I finalize the outer query, I close the database, and I return my counted set. Delete all assembly parts is the same old delete method that we've used from the beginning. Delete from assembly parts, and then prepared, stepped, finalized, and closed. Okay, so we have now the tools that we need to run the add part to assembly controller. So now looking at that, I have an add to assembly delegate, and this is going to actually throw add part to assembly with quantity back to my assembly list view controller, so it can in turn throw it back to the main view controller, which in turn will throw it back to the model. Now, if I look at my assembly add part view controller here, add part to assembly view controller, I can see that these fields are here, and I have prepared them in my header file to be wired up. I make a delegate, which is the add to assembly delegate property. I have an NS string here called assembly number, so I can keep that. And then these are all outlet properties, label quantity, text field part number, stepper quantity, and label status. Status is going to just log out what is in my NS counted set each time that I hit the add button. So I have quantity changed, which is going to be when the stepper's values changed. Dismiss keyboard is just when UI text field gets the event did end on exit, and then add tapped is when that add button is tapped. So let's look at these methods. We're getting there, I promise. So now as I look at this, I have a bunch of synthesis, assembly number, label quantity, label status, text field part number, stepper quantity, and then my delegate. Here's quantity changed. Extremely simple. The quantity text, that label next to my stepper, is going to just be set to a string with a format integer, which is an integer cast down of the sender's value. I have to cast sender.value to an int because it is a double, so I need to be casting that down to an int. Otherwise, I'll get a warning here. Dismiss keyboard resigns the first responder on the sender, which is the text field. And then add tapped, all it's really doing is it's setting an integer called quantity, which is the integer value of whatever's in my label quantity. And then I call add part to assembly with quantity against my delegate, which is the assembly list view controller. I set the part number, the quantity, and the label quantity all to either no text or 0, or the value of the stepper quantity is 0. And then finally I set the status text to the string with format out of the main controller's model, all parts for assembly. In other words, I'm setting the status text to log out the contents of that NS counted set. That's it. That's all I'm doing. When we get back to the delegate, this class, assembly list view controller, is the delegate of the add part to assembly list view controller. And I have defined an add part controller, which is segue.destination view controller. We know that we have to set the delegate in a storyboard during the segue. So in prepare for segue, I make sure that my segue's identifier is equal to the string assembly add part. Then I set the controller's delegate to this class. I set the table view cell. I want to get the tapped table view cell in this table, and then I get the assembly key from the text label text out of that tapped table view cell, and then I set the assembly number in the add part controller to that assembly key, and I set the title on the add part controller to the assembly key, and then the add part controller comes up and it's ready to go. So let's run this and see how it works. So what we're doing is we're adding some layers of complexity that all kind of revolve around interfaces, views in view controllers, and how we approach getting information in and out of a SQLite database using these. So as our application runs, we see we have a parts list here. If I hit assemblies, I'll see my assemblies that I just hard-coded into my main view controller at the beginning. Now, if I go into house 1 is just going to be a very simple house. I'm going to add one square, PN001, and if I do that, I want to hit return, and then make sure I'm adding 1. And now when I click add, I see my counted set. This is the address that the counted set is residing at in memory. And then I have PN001 with a quantity of 1. And this is the kind of format we get out from an NS counted set if we just log the raw information from it. Now, just to prove that that maybe we can add 2 triangles to this and see the result in the counted set, let's do PN002, which is our triangle part. We'll hit return. We'll add 2 of those. And when I click add, I see that my counted set for AN001 is PN002, quantity of 2, PN001, quantity of 1. So there we go. It's working. Very nice. Thank you very much.